I don't know if you've seen those tourism ads. Are usually targeted towards Black tourists, and they're for, suggestions to maybe visit Ghana or visit Jamaica or visit South Africa.
This season in Ethiopia offers a unique opportunity for you to reconnect with your heritage and give back to your community.
Here's the thing with those ads is that they are targeted towards Black tourists, but also they play on this theme of home and this idea of returning home. And what they're really doing is they're tapping into this larger conversation and larger narrative about a global Black diaspora maybe feeling disconnected from this notion of what home is. And the conversation we're about to have right now, I had just had this chat with Matt Amha, and we talked a little bit about how even those ads and this idea of Black tourism, even though those desires are real and those emotions are real, they're not free of race politics, they're not free of class politics, and they're certainly not free of empire. I got a lot out of this conversation with Matt. I hope that you enjoy it. On to it right now.
For many Black countries, tourism is a major economic driver. But for the first time in recent history, Black travelers from across the diaspora have become a massive demographic.
Black travelers, they're not just all getting together and going to an all-inclusive.
Right.
Most of them are gonna find how they can put their dollars into the local communities of color.
That is from the first episode of the new season of For the Culture. Matt Amha has watched that first episode. He's with me now. Matt, good to see you, pal.
What's up, man? Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, of course. Listen, so this first episode, Amanda Parris travels to Jamaica and to Ghana to unpack the Black tourist economy. What should people know about this particular episode before they get into it?
I think what they should know, Amanda goes to Ghana, she goes to Jamaica, and she's essentially kind of interrogating what it means to travel ethically as a Black tourist. It's a kind of, I think, self-assessment in a lot of ways. I think making clear that when you're going to the sub-Saharan African continent as a Black person, it is not a neutral act. It's kind of inherently political, and you're bringing with you all of your, frankly, your valuable Western currency, but also bringing with you your proximity to power, your luxuries, and you're going places that have been starved of opportunity. And so she's kind of asking the viewer to think critically about these things.
And they're not easy questions to ask, but also two, they're like kind of contextualizing this larger thing. Like Ghana, for example, had this recent Black tourist boom that can be traced back to this Year of Return campaign that they did back in 2019. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, it was a marketing strategy, employed by their government, like many other governments across the continent, to essentially entice the dollars of Black people in the West looking to connect to a place that, although they might know very little about, they have a kind of fraternal connection to, and they want to know more about, And so, tens of millions of Black people in the Americas, from the US to Cuba, Brazil, Puerto Rico, Haiti, that were brought to this continent as contraband, that still have this desire to connect to the place that their ancestors left. And so it is kind of, it's that desire that these business strategies are hoping to compel.
And that's not a desire that is often interrogated by other Black folks. I think when I think about that desire, I sort of quite often see it represented as sort of a face value thing. So what struck you the most about the ways that sort of Ghana was represented in terms of the conversations that they're trying to have in For the Culture?
So what struck me most is a conversation that she had that opened up the episode on Ghana's Cape Coast, at the so-called Door of No Return, which is the site believed to have been the final exit point for, I think, up to 1 million African people that were then forced onto slave ships that brought them into the Americas. And, Amanda is there at what is essentially a slave dungeon, and she is communing with the ancestors. She's having this deeply emotional experience. She's even crying at times. Her guide, though, is bringing a kind of humor and levity and theatricality, And for him, this is just another day at work. And his work happens to be located in a slave dungeon, but we're watching a man at work working on his customer, and they go on to explain that the difference in tone between the two maybe could come down to language in some way, but I think they're getting at something deeper, and it reminded me of when I went to Robben Island in Cape Town, which is where Nelson Mandela was held captive for nearly 20 years. And this was to me like a holy ground. So much suffering had happened on this island, and so much blood had been spilled, so much horror. I had read and studied so much, but I arrived to a place that felt like a carnival. Like, there were gift shops, there's memorabilia, there are photo lookouts, and so much of the conversation there on the tour that I'd gone on was about unity and forgiveness, and was like gesturing to the white audience there about the essential contributions of white people to the freedom struggle in South Africa, and and kind of a distance from apartheid. And so it's like, there are very different logics at play between the people that are overseeing these tours and often us that are going with all this expectation. If I can say too, she also had a conversation closer to the end of the Ghana segment where she spoke to a man that works in the tourism sector that talked about these cultural clashes that he's had with American tourists. And I think, he's getting to the point that there are like so often that Black travelers from this side of the world go over there and bring this kind of cultural chauvinism and bring these cultural impositions and wield it sometimes against the indigenous populations in these places, like not understanding the degree to which life there operates differently. Like you're not in Canada or the US or England or France anymore. And the hierarchies in the place that you're from don't necessarily exist in the same way here.
Right.
Like
you
you're
can't
going
just
to
impose
Africa
the same lens. That's not
at all.
Yeah.
You're on top of the hierarchy there. It's a much different thing, right? And you have to kind of get used to that.
Okay, so I want to play another clip. I want to play a clip from that episode. This is two Ghanaian promoters talking about some of the growing pains that came with this gigantic sort of boom in Black tourism. Have a listen to this.
It's one thing to invite people to come back, and it's novel and it sounds great. But it's another thing for people to be prepared to experience what they would when they got here. Tourism was young here. We had ways to go as far as the infrastructure of traffic, as far as service with customer service. And I just think that locally, people didn't understand why this was meant so much to people coming back.
What do you make of that moment there, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, I think the point that he's making is a vital one. And, he's talking about, I think, the natural conflict that happens between the sometimes like magical and mystic thinking of the Black cultural tourist that's looking to connect to their ancestral land and the pragmatism of the Black African that is just trying to get on with the business of living, And there's like this inherent tension between these two groups that, the episode does a good job of kind of parsing out and explaining.
Something that I love about Amanda Parris' work is that like she is comfortable in that tension. I think like wherever that tension is, she's not going to be someone who steers away from it. She will steer sort of a bit more directly into it. And I want to play. They went to Jamaica for this episode. How did the Black tourism conversation in Jamaica differ than the one in Ghana, do you think?
I mean, it differed a lot in that the travel mono economy in Jamaica is much different than the African one. Like it is, sorry to use a loaded term, but it is much more developed. They're not having to make the same argument around kind of race and Blackness in the same way or the same political argument. And the considerations that they're having to make are much different. I think there's also a much more kind of tangible connection often to the plantation economy, like in my own experience in the Caribbean, so many of these institutions, like these resorts and hotels, are literally located on former plantations, But the episode does a good job of talking about how, a lot of folks are being pushed out of their ancestral lands and are being kind of not permitted access to their ancestral lands, to like beautiful beaches and other areas. So slightly different than the African conversation, but there is a certain kind of connective tissue there.
I appreciate that this is also personal for you as someone who's done some of this tourism, as something that sort of you have an emotional access point and be like, oh, I need to work through some of this, and this involves this travel. So when you watch this episode, was there anything that you're like, oh, this was a bit left out of this conversation and I wish it had a bit more space here?
Yeah, I would say maybe, and I think they do some of this, but maybe some more of the kind of politics of it all. Like to just really lay out in very clear terms that as a Black traveler here in the Western Hemisphere, your desire to connect to your roots and to like see through what you might look at as a pilgrimage, it marks a moment of opportunity for like leaders in countries that otherwise have been cut off from the global economy, and that they will use the arguments of Pan-Africanism and the aesthetics of it to entice your dollar. And that there are countless regimes on the African continent, elected or otherwise, who are going to, as Amanda Parris wrote, gesture to Blackness, but ultimately answer to empire. And that you should be cognizant of that fact, that you are being marketed to, and you should move accordingly. I think, I happen to be Ethiopian, and like the Ethiopian government, for example, oversaw these campaigns of return that were marketed things like journey to the homeland, back to your origins, journey to the roots, while overseeing the 21st century single worst campaign of violence, which happened to be perpetrated against an indigenous African minority group, So we have to be really careful and move in a really, understand that we are being marketed to, that these are business logics, and that there are people on the ground whose experiences an expectation might really differ from our own that we have to be ready to account for.
Yeah, you don't have to dispose of your desires, but you must be aware of the sort of political spheres that they also occupy.
You must.
That is a part of being an alive person in the world.
Yeah.
Matt, I appreciate your time, man. You're brilliant. I really appreciate you being here. Thank you so much, friend.
Thanks so much for having me, man. Appreciate it.
Of course. Matt Amha is a journalist. He's one of the smartest cultural critics I know. He's based in Toronto, which is a wonder why he's a fan of the Arsenal Football Club, but he can't answer to that right now. You can catch season 2 of For the Culture with Amanda Parris streaming right now on CBC Gem. My name is Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This show is called Commotion. We'll be back tomorrow. We'd love to see you then.